Survivor's ready. Go!
Trump spoken.
Boston Rob and Amber are gonna do it.
This is a business trip, as I like to say.
You Brad Culpepper.
I'm tired of you and the fucking chicken.
You can call me the puppet master. They can be my little puppets.
It's not like you're making me deal with the devil here.
You get to milk your own milk, I guess.
Who the hell voted for me?
Chicken.
We got enough rocks here, too. We could build a pretty decent shelter just using rocks.
I'm supposed to talk lamb, or you? You understand that better?
Direct from Hobart, it's time for the only Survivor podcast in Australia dedicated to Survivor, bringing you all the latest interviews, episodes, and opinions from the greatest reality show on the planet. It's Survivor Oz, and here's your host, Ben Waterworth.
Hello, everybody out there. Welcome back to Survivor Oz, a week minus Ben Waterworth, if you're not a fan of his, and one more week to go and be here, Ben Waterworth again, if you are a fan of his, but you can put up with me for the next hour or so. I'm Colin Hilding filling in for another Survivor Cambodia Season 31 Second Chances recap. And as we do with every episode, minus one this season where scheduling didn't work out, we're joined by past contestants to talk about their experience on Survivor and bring some of their knowledge of the game to what we're seeing on the screen here. And we're very happy to have back, I'll say, one of my all-time favorite Survivor contestants, a Survivor contestant that I used in one of my answers in my application to become an Ozlit, just for my love of his game. And very good that we have him on this season, because the last time he was on, he actually did a recap with one of the contestants who's on this season. So if you haven't figured it out, it is Spencer Bledsoe's previous recapper from Blood vs. Water. First time on the show back, Marty Piombo. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Colin. Great to be on. Yeah, you just jogged my memory. That's right. Now I'm remembering it was actually a pretty hilarious interview. I was abroad. I think it was pretty interesting. I was in London, and Ben was, I think in Australia, and Spencer, I can't even remember where he was. That's right. It was very, very funny and great to be on with him, because I do love Spencer.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite recaps that I've heard of the last couple seasons too, and I'm guessing you can have a little bit of a connection here with Spencer and give us some insight into his game. He's definitely dominating the screen time. But before we jump into Spencer's game or anything on this past week's episode, first, why don't you just tell us how you're finding the season as a whole, Second Chances, if you've been watching the whole thing?
Oh, yeah, of course. I actually think it's incredible. I really do. I think this season has been, as everyone is probably saying, and I think I can't disagree with some of the observations that the actual cast members are expressing, both during the game and once they're voted off. If you're watching the Ponderosa tapes at all, it's a very different kind of game, and having these kind of players on makes it real, especially if you're a real fan of the game. These guys are all playing so hard. They really understand the game, as opposed to other seasons where it can be very interesting for sure with all brand new players, but this is intense, and it's really sort of breaking all the rules, if you will, which, we all want to watch something that's unpredictable. So not knowing where you're going to end up at the end of any given episode is really what it's all about. It makes it really exciting. So I'm absolutely loving it, and I love most of this cast, or a lot of the cast members anyway.
That's the perfect way of describing it. There are four of us, myself, Ben, Noah, and Jared, who are doing the power rankings this year every single week, and my power rankings have gotten to the point where I'm actually voicing my frustration every week, saying it is impossible to predict one week to the other what's happened in this game, because it is evolving so quickly. And the last recap I did was with Carolyn Rivera from last season, and she was kind of giving a theory on how, we had like old school Survivor, new school Survivor, and that maybe this will be like a third school of Survivor that we're seeing evolve here. And I think you're famous for being in a season where it also was very unpredictable, maybe for different reasons. But with this season, are you seeing this to be a new progression Survivor? Or I guess the most interesting thing that, I've kind of been trying to pick apart with this is this because we have players coming back for the first time, and a lot of people who have waited so long to get on here, that it's a different game because these people know each other? Or is this something that could go forward with new players in another season?
My instinct would tell me that no, I don't believe that this is how new players could play the game. I mean, speaking, from my perspective and my vantage point of having loved the game before, never missed an episode of Survivor, and then going on that experience, even I, considering myself to be a good player, have a strategic understanding of it all, your first time around is you really don't know what the hell is going on, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you do, but I'm being a little sarcastic, I think, but it's very risky to do what these players are doing right now, and I think you have to feel very comfortable in your gameplay and the strategy and take the kind of chances that they're doing. I think first-time players would be hesitant to try to sort of reshuffle the deck, every other day the way these guys are doing. I think you can do it, and I think we've seen some players do it. Like, when I think of somebody that played amazing and somehow got away with it was Tony Vlachos, for example. Mm-hmm. Like, he was, his alliances were shifting, every week the guy was taking people out that were on his alliances and somehow convincing everybody else to go along with them. That's pretty strong, and you don't see that typically. And I would hesitate to say that I think that new players would be, you want to go with what you're comfortable with and build an alliance and sort of stick with that and know that you're comfortable. Otherwise, I mean, I can't imagine how stressful this is for these guys playing out there. Like, it's a stressful thing as it is already, but to be so stressed that, at all times, anytime that someone's talking to somebody else or any kind of observation like that, your paranoid factor goes up, exponentially.
I think the one thing that's changed this season, like you said, might be harder for new players, is just it's more a term than anything else, and I'll get your opinion on this. The whole voting block term, which I kind of looked at from week to week and say, well, it's not so much maybe anything new, it's more just a sub-alliance, and I guess valuing sub-alliances, and maybe it has something to do with the fact that these players aren't just going to take it as personally, they're not valuing the alliances as much. But do you think there's that much of a distinction between what a voting block is and what maybe a sub-alliance is?
Well, I think there's still... I see where you're going with that, and you could argue yes, but I see these guys have kind of crossed over the line in some cases, where it goes beyond a sub-alliance, because every alliance, I think, clearly has its nucleus or its core, or you try to have it that way, and that's what people always talk about, where, are you on the bottom, or are you on the top? So that kind of, in and of itself explains that there is usually, say within an alliance of 5 people, there's usually 2 or 3 players that they just know that they're locked in together. I think in this season we've seen players kind of go outside of these nucleuses and these small alliances into different voting blocks and go back and forth, which is, I think, unusual and I think harder than just, a voting block that still remains by and large intact, Mm-hmm.
Tasha would be, I guess, one of those people that's kind of floating all around, or I guess you could even say Spencer, where there really doesn't seem to be any reason as to who they're sticking with, and it may be something that's working for them as they're getting far. I guess the first thing that happened in this episode is we get this, I guess, Kimmy trying to pull in this all-female alliance, and we have her talking to Wentworth first, and then the idea of pulling Tasha in there. And where do you see Tasha's game at so far? I mean, she's kind of gone from being the one who is very loyal to this, let's bring the old Bayon together, to the point where she used it as a strategy to get her ahead, and it was shocking how she was able to do that before the merge. And she's been the one kind of pushing this whole, you need an alliance, a voting block only gets you so far, but now she's kind of teetering the line here. I mean, this whole episode was really about her. Do you think she's one of those players who maybe are late to cross the line, or is it maybe a better idea on her part that she has been trying to hold to just these alliances as opposed to the voting blocks?
I think so far it's been working for her, and I think if she can hang on, I mean, but all these players are smart enough to know that, I've said before this season on other interviews that, old school versus new school, you can never, I mean, you can have an inclination, which is, I'm going to be more of an old school player, but at the end of the day, it's all about the votes and being cognizant of, where the strength is going to ultimately be, and you can't just say I'm going to be old school and never break that mold, because otherwise you'll find yourself on the chopping block really quickly. So I think for her now, as the game is shifting, if, for example, it made sense to form an all-women's alliance, that may end up working for her, and she's going to have to make that shift at some point in time. And now as the game narrows, people are taking a look at trying to understand who is that final 5 going to be, and I think all bets are off at this point in time in the game. But I'd say leading up to this, if you look at her versus Spencer, who I think Spencer, has played the kind of game that you just said, but I think because out of desperation, right? Like he's had to. It's all about just making it from one episode to the next. And he's, he hasn't had much in the way of choices. So I think he's done a good job of navigating that and managing under the circumstances that he's been under yet again, this season versus his last.
Yeah, well, Spencer developed that reputation of being the Charlie Brown of Survivor the first time around, and it really hasn't changed that much on this season. It is interesting you brought up about the whole old school thing, people going in old school, because the first half of this season, everything up into the merge was very much almost at old school dominant. It was about forming relationships, and Spencer, I think more than anybody, is the one who struggled with that, where he really was trying to adapt to that, and like you said, just trying to stay on the right side of the votes. And this past week, he made the move against Steven last week. And initially I was thinking, well, is this the best idea? Is Steven the guy you want to be getting out? But I was starting to get the impression on this week that maybe Spencer was trying to build a resume, that he has been the guy, like you said, who's been on the bottom, been struggling more. And he figured, if I'm getting to the finals, I need to have something on my resume that says I made this move. Do you think that was more his motivation, Steven, or was Steven more of a threat to Spencer going forward than Joe was?
Well, as you know, we never get to see everything, right? So who knows what's actually happening behind the scenes that might be the more accurate or more realistic narrative as opposed to the edit that we're getting. But I think, any time that you can remove somebody that is as strategic as a Fishback, it's definitely going to play in, to your advantage. And I think when you really look at Spencer and Fishback, these guys are super, super students of the game right now. We could talk for hours here on and debate the probabilities of who you're better off with moving, onto the next vote. But I certainly don't find it completely unnatural that he would have, chosen Fishback. And by the edit, who knows where all the other people were starting to stack up. We always might be presented with what looks like one person was driving it, when in fact, for all we know, or for all we know, maybe he was just a swing vote ultimately in the whole thing and not really driving the Fishback ouster.
There was one thing you said earlier, which is interesting, because we obviously have the family visit in this episode, and you had mentioned, how hard this season has been for these people and how much stress they're under. And I think most fans would come into an All-Star season and expect that it might be easier for the people. Not that the elements are easier, but because you have a little bit more of a gauge on the players. But I think more than any other season with the family visits I've seen, these contestants just seem to completely break down. Like, there were even comments from Jeff about how he'd never seen somebody sprint to their spouse as quickly as Jeremy did. And, we saw Joe and his dad were very affectionate. The family visit this week, do you think this is maybe a little bit of evidence of how hard the game has been on these people? Or am I the only one who started noticing a difference this compared to other family visits?
No, it's kind of interesting because, oddly enough, I don't think that CBS and the producers spend as much time during the season sharing with the audience how incredibly challenging and arduous the conditions are for folks that are out there on the beach. And this is a season that, what I've heard from players that have come back, that is, rumored to be literally one of the most taxing, physically challenging environments that they've ever filmed at. And, especially with this much rain, means you can't cook, means you can't eat the little food that you do have, and you're just like on the border, on the edge of being hypothermic for days and days on end without sleeping. It is absolutely, just emotionally and mentally speaking, especially the no sleep, is just absolutely punitive. It's just, you're just a wreck. And that definitely, I'm sure, leaves people very threadbare and emotionally vulnerable. And I could see, I pictured myself, and I could tell you I would certainly sprint to my loved one. And for most of the people that made it that far, after making the merge and then, either making the jury or, making it to Family Day is definitely one of those absolute key milestones. I certainly would have I was dying to make it that far in the game. And for those that do, it's just got to be so emotional.
I think your season was probably one of the other more recent ones where the conditions were very harsh, too. Harsh enough at least that a couple of people quit after you. You were probably, I guess, a few votes away from the family visit, but do the players know much going in about how this is going to work? Like we've heard in times in the past that they put together a list or something like that. Like, what's the process before the game starts? Are you aware if this will ever happen, or do they leave it very up in the air and say maybe, maybe not? You know, we just need an idea of somebody that we might bring out.
What do you mean you mean to actually get on? You mean for
the family visit? Like when you're cast and you're about to start, do they say give us a list of people, or do they tell you it will or won't happen?
No, they don't tell you it will or won't happen, but you always give a list and prioritize. I can't remember exactly, but probably 2 or 3 people, some list that would be the people that would be eligible to go if in fact they pull that off and it goes through. So. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I know I made it far enough my season that they were already starting to prep the families that might have been going, and mine was definitely getting prepped, and they came out and spent time with them and all that, so that they could get comfortable being behind a camera and so forth, or in front of the camera. So that's as much as I know about the process itself.
Oh, okay. With this season again, like you mentioned, how the old school, and I was saying that the old school definitely dominated the first half. There was kind of this odd confessional earlier in the season about Spencer, not being able to say I love you to his girlfriend. And at the time it just seemed like, well, it was just a scene where Spencer was setting him up. He's a bit of a changed player. And in this episode, he kind of, not that he used that in a game sense, but it's something that definitely came back. And are you enjoying the fact that this season is maybe throwing more of that out than, like, I've heard some people complain, yeah, there's a lot of these scenes about, people's personal lives or things that aren't related to the game, but are you enjoying having that balance where we're getting these payoffs several weeks later that are the personal stories?
Yeah, I like the personal part. I mean, I think that's a little bit of why we watch. I mean, it gives us insight into these people and what the challenges are that they're facing while they're out there and reconciling things that are core to their personality and so forth. I mean, it's very real. And like I said earlier, especially when you're just, worn down to the bone, it's all these psychological things that are, either just below the surface or things that you are challenged with that, come to the surface because you're just so out and out, just worn out. So I think it's interesting to see it. I mean, I like seeing, I think we all like it, and I think the show likes to show vulnerabilities that people have. It makes them very human. I think it makes us associate with them and, to feel their pain or to feel the challenges that they're going more intimately when we become part of that narrative.
It's something that's definitely come up a lot more this season than past ones. I mean, even before we get to this episode, there was a lot of stuff with Savage talking about his wife and his personal life and everything. And I think it is striking a nice balance where we're bringing some of the things back from old school Survivor. But of course, even in a family challenge like this, the game was not completely out of it. Wentworth won, and we had her kind of being brought in. Kimmy's the one that sort of instigated this idea of the all-female alliance, but the opportunity came up with the reward where she could include these other family members, which really amounted to half of the people get their family members stick around and half don't. Do you think that Wentworth was thinking strategy at all in her choices with who she brought on? And do you think maybe the choices she made were good ones, or would you have done anything different?
Every time that happens, you're so psyched, but man, it has got to be just one of the most mind-bending decisions to make, and such a bummer. I mean, can you imagine, just knowing what that feels like and what it would be like for people to be able to spend some time with their loved one, and you're making the decision? And how does that work out for you? Do you end up paying for it, or do you take the right people with you? How does that all play out? I think at the end of the day, everyone should know, anybody that really plays the game, doesn't really matter, right? I mean, you shouldn't want to just vote somebody off because they didn't take you, and you certainly wouldn't toss somebody a vote simply because they allowed you to have, a getaway with your loved one. I just don't think that that's really where it's all at the end of the day. These players should be hopefully good enough to know at the end of the day when they're casting their vote that they're casting it for, the right person, and that the person that really won the season, not somebody that ended up, befriending you and taking you on something like a reunion reward.
The one that I'm wondering more than anybody else, again, is Tasha, because she was the swing vote this week, very obviously the swing vote. And unless she just did such a good job of convincing Wentworth and Kimmy, yes, I'm with you, which I wouldn't put it past her. She seems to be a very persuasive person. she was the one that wasn't brought into her. I'm thinking Wentworth probably needed her vote at that point, and I thought maybe that could have been a bit of a mistake. Maybe do the trade-off because she wanted to get rid of Joe, and she brought Joe along. Meanwhile, she left Tasha out. So if you, let's say you were in this position, between those two, which one do you think you value more? Making Joe comfortable enough so that maybe he doesn't care about winning immunity, or making Tasha comfortable enough that maybe she swings with you later on?
I don't think Joe would ever feel comfortable enough that he wouldn't go for the immunity. Joe's just, I think I posted something this week, which it's always funny, including myself. I'm sure I said the same thing. Every single player that gets voted off Survivor, the reason they say I was voted off was, because I was just such an incredible threat. I was such an incredible player. In fact, sometimes you're getting voted off because you're a jackass or because people are tired of having you around. So it's not always the case, but I would have to say with Joe, 100% it is. I mean, the guy is an incredibly strong player, and I think that they were right to do that. I don't know that they understand enough of how much of a threat Wentworth is and what a strong chance she has of winning the whole thing at this point. I just don't think that people are aware of that. She's been playing this game, and clearly she's been on the bottom quite a bit, which, also just intuitively makes people not really focus on her. But I just don't think that people are aware of how strong she actually is.
Let's talk about Joe for a second. I mean, I guess let's cover the physical game first. I think there have been a lot of survivors who were strong physical threats throughout their season where they didn't have nearly as much attention as Joe did. And it's kind of surprising because on his season, I mean, his physical prowess didn't really get him that far. It's not like he was that big of a threat. And even when I was doing the recap with Carolyn earlier in the season, Joe was from her season, and she kept stressing the point saying there's lots of people out there. There's Keith's out there. There's Tasha's out there. She won a couple of immunities in her season. There's Spencer's, there's other threats. Where do you think it really came from with Joe on this season where he was viewed that much as a threat before we even got to the merge, where it was basically just as soon as he loses, he's gone?
Well, I think part of this is kind of interesting for this season too, right? Whether it's Joe or Fishback or whoever it may be, is that you do bring some of your history with you, right? And because people have said, well, maybe he could just fake it and throw some challenges, but everybody knows what he's capable of, and that's not in his nature anyway. But that guy's going into it already with the target on his back. There's no question about it. I mean, it's the irony of this game, and in his comments after getting voted off, he's like, it's such a tough game, right? Because the game, at least for a while, you would think the game of Survivor kind of rewards, or there should be a lot of good by being the strong kind of hero-ish type player. But, in this game, everything can work against you. If you're really strong, you're a threat and you get voted off. If you're really weak, you're a threat and you're going to get voted off because, you can't pull your own weight. If you're really strategic, you get voted off because you're a threat. And, if you're really strategic, sometimes you're kept around because you can lead the group and so on and so forth. So everything's a double-edged sword. And I think for him, he had that expectation, from the whole rest of the cast, just right from the get-go. I really do think so. And come on, I mean, how many challenges did he end up winning, Colin? Was it 5 or?
Yeah, it was 4 in a row.
4 in a row, right?
At least for the immunities. Who knows about rewards?
Yeah. So I just, I think he's a big, really, really tough for somebody like that to play the game. Really tough. I mean, hats off to him for making it as far as he did.
Well, I'm assuming you're one of those former players / viewers that can watch a show and think, if I was in this person's shoes, I could do it differently. If you were Joe, what could you have done differently, just speculating, to get a little bit further or to maybe take that target off? Do you have any theories as to something he could have done differently?
I really don't.
He's just one of those guys who's kind of screwed one way or the other.
Yeah, no, I really do. I believe that. I mean, he could have, we could sit here and speculate as to, well, if he had, created such and such alliance or hung out, but, everybody was looking. I mean, if Terry had stuck around and if Savage was still around, he would have had a better shot with players like that. But once you start taking players out like that, I mean, Jeremy certainly wanted to play with him for a while, but then, Jeremy, you can only have a couple of really strong players like that, and Jeremy's definitely going to look at him as somebody that's going to, ride through a bunch of different immunities, especially towards the end. I mean, he could be like a Fabio or somebody else that ends up winning, the last 3 in a row, and then you're just out of luck.
And that was the other thing when Wigglesworth was voted out, I was thinking of, because the only reason they really gave her is saying, well, she's close to Joe and we want to make sure we take one ally away, but surely she was the other one they probably were thinking about. I mean, she won, what was it, like 5 immunities in her season, or again, went on a run right at the end, so there seemed to be a lot of paranoia this season about the individual immunities, and that's probably what did Joe in. The only thing that I really thought of earlier in the season is if Joe had maybe thrown the first individual one, but then again, if you're somebody like Joe and you know there's that much of a target, do you want to leave yourself vulnerable like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you saw these guys after every single challenge, after every episode. I mean, they were just gunning for Joe. I mean, every time he would make it a little further, everyone's head would just bow and just oh no, and then because then it's also kind of like a no-brainer on some level, and then you've got to suddenly shift your whole game, and if it's not Joe, well then who is it going to be? And then it's another reshuffling of the whole deck all over again for these guys.
Well, and we saw that even in this immunity challenge. The second Joe wins, he passes out, but the first instinct that I think it was Abby, Maria, and Wentworth had was they stood up and they cheered at him losing, That's
what I mean.
Yeah, they were desperate to have him gone at this point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly it.
Let's talk a little bit about Joe's strategic game here, because we haven't really seen a lot of that throughout this season. There have been subtle things that other people have mentioned, like people mentioned, yeah, he's got Wigglesworth around, for this vote and everything, but the only strategy played in this episode, I think, was, again, a bit more of a questionable one, and maybe you can bring a bit of an insight as to how this might have worked. The idea he threw out there was to take out Abby Maria, who, at this point, I mean, anybody watching this is thinking, this is one of the easiest goats ever to beat. And that was kind of the strategy he pitched, but even when he pitched it to Jeremy, Jeremy's like, yeah, she's easy money to beat. Do you think that there was anything to Joe's, or was that kind of just maybe the wrong strategy to play? Because I'm wondering how you ever get people on board with voting somebody out that they can beat that easily.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, again, this goes back to one of my earlier comments, which is sometimes, people are just, they just can't take a personality anymore, and I think there's certainly a lot of that. If you watch Ponderosa and everything else, it's almost like a running joke now as to how much Abby appears to just have been rubbing everybody the wrong way, So, there comes a point in time where you just say, I got to take somebody out because they're just annoying. And for him, who else could it have been? I mean, there was enough people, and Abby has certainly gotten a bunch of votes this season, so there was clearly, on any given day, a number of people that would have been happy to get rid of Abby, I think. And maybe he just didn't understand how strong that group of girls are or were, and how much people are just absolutely willing to take a goat all the way to the end. Because I have no doubt that if Abby goes to the end, she will not receive a single vote. I mean, there's no question in my mind. And, there's people like Jeremy and Savage, more of the old school players, that would actually, I would rather roll the die and go strong, go with strong players all the way to the end and just duke it out. And then there's other people who are like, no, I'm definitely going to bring 2 people that I think it's going to be very hard pressed for them to get any votes. And it's just a different way of playing.
I was thinking about that, after the vote happened, thinking, well, was Joe maybe thinking in terms of how many allies Abby Maria has? Because obviously we know there's Cass on the jury, there's Sierra, there could eventually be Wentworth. But then I really started to think about it and think, is there a chance that even those 3 vote for Abby Maria? It's pretty unlikely at this point. I mean, is Abby Maria even playing a game at this point, do you think?
I don't know. It's pretty interesting, right? I mean, I would love to hear your take on it. I mean, she's gotten absolutely 0 screen time the last 3-4 episodes. I mean, we're talking nothing, no confessionals, absolutely nothing. And there's got to be a reason behind that. And I doubt it's because she's suddenly, they're saving Abby for the last, couple of episodes. Like, I just don't think that that's the narrative that's going on here. If she makes it to the end, she'll make it just because they're dragging her along, and that's just not. There's no great story there. There just isn't. I can't picture her getting up in front of the jury and telling them what an amazing game and what amazing moves she made and everything else. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? Not going to happen at all, actually. So, I mean, what's your take on the fact that she's had like zero time?
Well, I mean, the first half of the season, she pretty much dominated all the screen time, and what we did see then was she was constantly flipping alliances. She's with this person, then she gets paranoid with them, she flips to the other one, and the only strange thing that's happened is that she seems very loyal to this whole, the Witches' Coven, as they've been labeled, Sierra and Wentworth, that as soon as she's kind of picked the people she wants to stick with, she just becomes a background character. But the thing that I found more interesting with Abby Maria is that I'm hoping to eventually write an article for our site on why every season needs an Abby Maria just for the entertainment value. Because, yeah, her game's not there, but she's kept things so unpredictable. Like, how can you not enjoy a season where there's a player that is that unpredictable that they could do something that's not even in their best interests, going forward? And I think your season, I'm actually a big fan of Nicaragua, despite the fact that I think the players that I was rooting for, like you and Brenda, who were really playing the game, got voted out so early. After that happened, it just became almost like such a gong show. It was so unpredictable that it made for great TV. And I think more than anything, that's what I wish we could get back a little bit with her. Like, have her flipping all over the place. Have her doing these erratic things, because it made for a really entertaining season.
Yeah, and trust me, I mean, and I think I've said this before, and I'm pretty psyched with how Wentworth has played this season, but I couldn't immediately get behind a lot of people or women that were on this particular cast, and Wentworth has been awesome, and I would put heavy money on her taking the whole thing. But I wasn't crazy about a lot of the other players, and the only one that I kind of was Monica, just because I think we may have almost played together in previous callbacks, and I just she didn't get a ton of time and wasn't positioned very well this season, but I was definitely behind her, and I definitely wanted, for the same reasons you would, I wanted to see Abby on because I just knew there'd be some fireworks. The Brazilian firecracker would go off, and you would just be like, oh God. So there's some value there, and yeah, you've got to have one of those. But it's interesting. I mean, I think as I look at how Survivor has progressed, I think you see a lot less. I think they're trying to strike a balance, I think, and I could be wrong on this, where they don't want people to be super nasty anymore. I mean, I think there was once upon a time, yes, and they chose people, and people were really, really nasty. And I don't know that really pays off, and I think the show has gone out of their way when there have been incidents of either even mildly, racist comments or sexist comments or stuff that we saw, in the last season,
season 30.
where, and I don't think that's what Probst and Burnett are all about. I think they don't want that sort of associated with this show. Like, so I think they want something that's down the middle, that's going to be somebody super annoying and that's going to be kind of bitchy, but not something that's going to be toxic emotionally. Like, I just don't think that stuff is not what it once maybe used to be on the show.
Yeah. I noticed a huge shift this season too, again, from last one, and it's again something for the benefit of the season. You mentioned Wentworth there. I'd like to get you to just elaborate on the opinion a little bit too on her game. It's interesting because if I'm analyzing, her game versus somebody like Jeremy or somebody like Tasha, who's made moves that have kept them kind of in power for a long time, it doesn't necessarily stack up. But I see her playing a very similar game to Spencer. And what they both seem to be doing is almost playing for those big moves. They are playing, like I said with Spencer, for the resume points. Do you think that that's more of her focus? Like, because she doesn't even seem paranoid. I mean, all the way back when it was, yeah, me and Terry are on the bottom and I'm going to throw him under the bus, she's never really worried about when she's on the bottom, but if she has that opportunity to make a big move, whether it gets her into power or not, she's more just like, I'll get to another week. Do you think that she's building a resume here for Final Tribal Council?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always helps, right? But I think as long as you're not a total goat, making big moves they're cool, they're great, all that good stuff. You have to get that consistently and had carried that all the way to the final 3 in order to have that resume and to be able to, solicit votes from the jury. But, just if you can only pull off one big move, then, that can really blow up in your face. And I think part of it for Wentworth was, she's pulled big moves when she had nothing to lose, honestly. I mean, where she was on the bottom anyway, and she either had an idol or she was able to swing things in a way that's pretty strong, right? And I think, if you talk about moves, I think Wentworth has already built plenty of a resume for this season.
Well, I think the other major player we really can't get away with not talking about here is Jeremy, who's been by far, the dominant character this season as far as game goes. But at the same time, like I said, it's very different, and this is where I think it comes down to how is this season? You were saying earlier that this season, the way these players are playing doesn't necessarily work in another season. How are this season's jury really viewing this game? You threw out there that Savage may say, let's go for a strong person. And we really have Jeremy's game, which is stay in control, but don't make it obvious. And then we have people like Spencer and Wentworth who are saying, let's make a move that's a bit more obvious, to get some attention from people. Do you think that Jeremy maybe has a better shot than everybody else? Or I guess just give us an analysis on Jeremy's game as you see it.
Yeah, I think Jeremy has a really strong shot. I mean, he's been consistent, right? He has not been erratic. He's been in a good position most of the game, but he's been blindsided in terms of things not going the way that he wanted them to on one or more occasion in this season too. So, but I think he's been a really strong player, and he's obviously a threat. I mean, people have just been gunning for other people, but I think it'd be interesting. I haven't really gone and looked at this, but I don't know that he's had a lot of votes go his way actually this season when you really think about it, which is always kind of interesting. I mean, I go back and I look at my ass, and I got more votes against me in my season, and I was only, and I was voted out, like midway through or 25 days in, but I got like 15 votes cast against me. Now, granted, of course, Jane, was behind most of those, cast those, even when her alliance was not voting for me, she was still voting for me. She hated me so much. But I think if you look, I don't know how many votes Jeremy's gotten this season. I don't think very many at all.
Yeah, they might have been one, but yeah, nothing's really coming to mind. I think, like you said with you, I mean, the biggest memory anybody from Nicaragua would probably have is every time a vote came your way, I think you lost 10 pounds just in sweating. You were always, you were always in that position where you were panicking and everything. And it probably would be nice to be in a Jeremy position where you don't necessarily have to worry. Do you think somebody like Jeremy, everybody's saying, every tribal council, oh, we're all worried, we're going home. Do you think somebody like Jeremy really is worried, or do you think that he's very confident at this point he's making it to the end?
Oh, I think you're still sweating it. I mean, you have to be. Yeah, I'm looking online right now. He's not had a single vote cast his way this whole season. I mean, I think he's got to feel pretty confident. But we all know. I mean, the minute that you feel you're confident is when bad things happen. It's the classic. I love it when people are like, "Man, I'm sitting so pretty," and then that's the kiss of death. Those are the famous last words. So he's got to feel pretty strong, but I mean, there's a lot of strong people left still, so it's hard. It's hard. I mean, there's still good people left in this game, and it's just got to be mind-racking for these poor guys at this point in time when they were out there. I mean, it just had to have been absolutely mind-boggling.
Well, I mean, we've covered everybody but two players, and it's not even that it's intentional, but it's just kind of sad there's two people who are really struggling to get the audience's attention this season, or the editor's attention, whatever it may be. Kimmy and Keith. So if we have much to add, or if you have anything to add, I guess let's talk about Kimmy first. To me, she kind of comes across like we see nothing from her, and then she'll have one big episode where she's forcing this one strategy, and then nothing. Is Kimmy even in this game anymore? I mean, really, there's no way to tell what's going on out there, but based on the edit we're seeing, is there any evidence that Kimmy could potentially be a winner here?
I think she could be. I mean, I don't think she's really pissed people off, which is always, or at least not that we could tell. In the beginning, she had some strong camera time that we saw her and was pretty forceful. She's definitely been around the game, and she knows it inside and out, and I don't think she's got a lot of enemies on that jury at all, at least not that I can tell. So, no, I think, I wouldn't put money on her taking it all the way to the end, but I think with all these players, I mean, think about it, other than Abby, I mean, Wentworth, Jeremy, Tasha, Spencer, I'd see all these guys final three, and Kimmy too. And if Abby's there, it's only because they're bringing her to the end. But, a lot of these players are really strong, so everyone's got to be sweating bullets. And Keith, I mean, again, that's like another person. You know the drill with a Keith. You got to have one of those too. Just like you got to have an Abby, you got to have a Keith. And I think not my cup of tea. I mean, it looks like he's, I'm sure, a beautiful guy, and I think he's one of those guys that maybe doesn't come off as being really smart on screen, but I think he is. Definitely love the fact that the guy can actually compete in challenges, which is pretty awesome. Because he doesn't strike you as a Joe type guy, but man, he's hung in there on a number of different challenges. Other ones maybe not so much, but likable enough guy. But I don't. He doesn't strike me as like the guy that's really thinking about the game and strategizing all night long and trying to figure. I don't see that happening. And we all tend to relate to one player over another. And I know Probst would probably yell at me and call me a dunce and say, he's just playing he's playing his game, and it's not always your game. So,
can you imagine though somebody like Keith who really is playing this game hard, who knows exactly what he's doing? Like I did recap last season, early in the season with Jeremy and Val, and they were telling me this story about Keith, or Jeremy was telling me the story about Keith, how when paranoia was at its peak, as you probably reach that point when you're in the individual game. Paranoia is at its peak. Person can't go off to go to the bathroom without people like, what are they doing? What are they talking about? And Keith would be off just, soaking around in a little pool of water for 4 hours and nobody would care he was gone. A guy like that would be a very dangerous player if he really had his head in the game.
Yeah, if he knew what he had going on. Absolutely. But not a chance. The guy's just hoping and praying that it's not him the next time, and that, he gets to cast his vote along with everybody else. So, he'll probably go a little bit further and a little bit further until it's time.
It's probably really hard to speculate on a reason for this, again, without knowing, what's being left out of the edit or anything, but just giving some perspective, maybe, from what these players are thinking. This really came down to a split this week about, the all-female alliance, and then is Tasha going to the other side. In order for any of these numbers to work, Keith probably should have been brought into the loop, and yet he was the only person left out of the vote. And I really am just wondering, what is he just such a sure thing that you can tell him to do something and he does it, that it doesn't matter if you bring him on the vote? I'm not really sure what the benefit was of either side not trying to use Keith in the vote to get rid of Joe.
I didn't understand that. I didn't understand why the one rogue vote for Tasha. I just didn't get that. And why would, for all we know, honestly, Keith was out to lunch, man. And he stood up and I thought it was Tasha. What, it was Joe? Oh my God. I didn't know.
He was too afraid to say, let's stick with the plan, that he didn't want to interrupt anything. Because, I'll just, first name that comes off the top of my head.
Yeah. Because that just made no sense to me. Why wouldn't they tell him, well, yeah, I don't know. Maybe they thought he was going to go and talk to Joe, but I mean, every single person voted for Joe.
Well, this is where I think maybe Tasha's playing a much stronger game than anybody's realizing, and the fact that, like I said, Wentworth didn't feel the need to bring her into the reward. Jeremy maybe didn't feel the need to bring Keith into the vote because he was that sure Tasha was with them. There'd be nothing funny going on. We didn't get a resolution this week, and that's the really fascinating thing that makes me more interested in next week's episode, is that we have this split of these two factions, and Tasha's in the middle, and coincidentally, they both were gunning for the same person this week. So, if you had to take a guess as to which side Tasha's on, is she with Jeremy and Spencer? Is she with Wentworth and Abby Maria and Kimmy? Which side do you think she's leaning towards?
I think she's the latter. I mean, I would like to think that she's with Jeremy and Spencer, but where is this thing going to go for her? Which direction is it going to go better? Then again, could be better with the other group, with the women, but, that's going to be short-lived, and I don't think she's at the top of anything over there, that if they narrow it down, she's probably going to be at the very bottom.
Yeah. And then she's in a Sierra position where she's fighting from the bottom, and, when do you flip again?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the most interesting thing that I think this season has, is that there's these story threads that they're playing out from one week to the next, where you're kind of curious, how is this going to play out? Like, even we saw Tasha saying a few episodes ago, like, Jeremy fooled me before, I'm not going to give him the chance to fool me again. And then we have her basically voting with him several weeks in a row. Like, there's so many things out there that I think they're laying the pipe to maybe pay off later on, but then there's been plenty of things that have happened so far this season where you feel like they're laying the pipe and then that player's cut out. So it's just all around, even just on the editing level, it's such an unpredictable season. I don't know how anybody can guess what's going on at this point.
No, I don't. I mean, that's what makes it so great. I mean, aside from the fact, I think they have really great people on, right? And we've already seen a lot of great people leave the game too. People like Varner that I think I would have loved to have watched continue to play the game. Folks like Savage that I loved, and of course Dietz and stuff. So I'm crazy about the season. I think it's awesome. I think they did a great job. I think the setup. I think hiding the idols during the challenges. I think giving the special voting powers. I mean, I think they've done a really, really good job of mixing things up and not having it be weird or blow up in their face. I think they've done a great job. I'm really, really enjoying the season. And man, I'll say it again, it looks like so incredibly harsh out there. I can't imagine. Yeah, and Nicaragua was really bad too, but this looks like they had even more rain than we had. And we had rains sometimes that lasted 3 days in a row, and it was the same misery, right? So yeah, feel for those guys. Really, really hard.
And nobody's quit. That's a second chance season for you. Another benefit. Yeah,
I know. When you have people like this that is just like waited 5 years, 10 years to have this come to fruition, they're so vested. There's just no frickin' way people are going to quit. We've seen so much emotion, which I think is really cool. I mean, between Fishback, Savage, and even Spencer. I mean, I love it. I think it's great. We get to see how real these people are.
Well, we're going to get to our final set of questions. We'll get some predictions on what's going to happen next from you. We'll also update you on your predictions from the last time you were on with Spencer. But before we even get to that, we do have some listener questions. And I'll just say, we got probably a dozen questions. And I would guess that more than half of them were all asking one question or making one statement, which is, why was Marty not on Second Chances? I'm looking over every question here, and I swear, it's like, you could just stop at any random one, and it's like, were you going to be on Second Chances? Did you have any conversations about coming back? Why aren't you on? Marty was robbed. Hashtags come up twice in here. Were there any discussions to bring you on to this season?
I would love to tell you guys, I have been, contacted a bunch of times in the past. Actually, every single season since mine that's had returning players, I've been in the mix. But oddly enough, no, not even a call on this one. And all I can speculate, I guess, is that I assume I don't really pretend to know much about the casting process, but it's not just being a player that might make sense to coming back, but you fit into a category. And when you look at the kind of players that they brought back that are kind of in my age category with maybe some similar type profiles, I think that Savage and Dietz picked those spots up, maybe even Varner, and they were great, players for that. So I don't know. I really couldn't tell you why. It's heartbreaking, but I don't know, and I wouldn't bullshit you and tell you that I was contacted, because it would be lying to you.
I have to be honest, that's the most surprising thing I've ever heard. I was expecting you to say, well, yeah, I got the call, because we've had a lot of people say, I got the call, but it didn't really go from there. As soon as this initial cast was announced, when it had like 40 names on it and it was unofficial, I was thinking, like, there has to be a mistake here. Like, how can Marty not be on this? But at least it gives us hope that you've been contacted, like you said, for every other season. There'll be some chance to bring you back in the future. Would you still come back at this point?
Yeah, I would. I mean, it was hard, too, because everybody that was getting the calls, they were all calling me, because they were all assuming the same thing you did. And I just had to, tell them, God, I wish I could tell you otherwise, but no, not happening. So, no, I'm still, call me lame, call me whatever. My ringtone on my iPhone is the Survivor theme song. my stamps that I ordered from Stamps.com that I'm looking at right now that I only put on my Christmas cards to my Survivor pals is also a headshot from Survivor, a hilarious one.
Nice.
So no, I am very God, I love it. It's there are some players out there that wouldn't come back, and no, I'm so in love with this game and so passionate about it that who knows? Hopefully, one of these days it comes together. I would definitely, if I got the call and I had an opportunity, I would definitely be there.
Well, as a spin-off from that question, both Dophil and Zachary Chong both have asked, aside from yourself, who from your season do you think should come back, or would you like to see back on second chances? And this is one of our final 5 questions later, so we can just get out of the way now.
Yeah, I mean, I could see someone like Holly actually going back, believe it or not. I mean, I think she came around, and I think she was somebody that people enjoyed watching. I could see, and there's been speculation before, and people have made comments to me that things have been kicked around where there would be a season of arch nemesis, arch rivals kind of a thing. And since Jane and I kind of had that thing going on, and still do, I've never said a word to her ever since our season ended filming. I could see something like that, so I could see her maybe coming back in that regard. I mean, whether I like it or not, or whether anybody else likes it or not, she did end up winning fan favorite, so she must have been doing something right. So, and then beyond that, from my season, I don't really know. I mean, there's not. I don't know that there's that many people that really stood out in our season that would be. I mean, I think obviously, Brenda got her shot, and I think she was a shoo-in, right? I mean, on so many different levels. I just think she was a great player, and she's just got it all going on. So, I don't know who else from my season. Nothing really sticks out,
Well, we got a couple others from Zachary Chong here, which he actually wants me to mention that you're one of his favorite characters on Survivor and an underrated player, which, as I said, I backed that up earlier. I even put you on my application to be involved in the Survivor Oz show. So, big shout out from Zachary Chong there.
Awesome.
And the main question he asks, and he asks this to almost every contestant we have on the show. We did something, I guess we started it about a year ago. We started recording it a year ago, and there were 5 of us who sat down and we ranked every single Survivor contestant in the history of the show. And, we'd put up one, and then everybody else would have to get a majority to agree. Number 412 is Jimmy T, and so on. And Zachary Chong wants to know about how you feel about your placing. Now, I'll just say out of the entire history of Survivor characters, you finished number 91. Zachary says it's a bit low for him, that he thinks he should have been in the 60s to 40s. So how do you feel about your ranking at number 91 of all time?
Oh, I mean, to be for somebody that left the game as early as I did, I guess that's okay, right? I mean, there's been so many people that have played this game and have been awesome at it that have come back and had a second chance. And I mean, hell, I'd love to be farther up than that, but that basically puts you in the top quarter percentile, right, of anybody and everybody that's played the game. So I don't know how those rankings come about and so forth, but yeah, I'd love to see it higher than that. But 91, I guess, doesn't suck.
That's a way better reaction we got from Jonathan Penner. Zachary asked this when I was recapping with Jonathan Penner, and Jonathan Penner was like, "That's crazy." It's like he was basically saying, "I should be in the top 20 of all time. You guys are a bunch of idiots."
Oh, that sounds like Penner.
Yeah.
No, I'd just be further promoting, the belief, I'm sure, by, I think my character is somebody that, you either like Marty. I'm sure there's a ton of people that are like, I can't stand that guy as well. I mean, I've certainly got a lot of that during my season. It's just too cocky, too full of himself, too confident, too outspoken, too loud, too this, too that. So, if I were to say that, and plus, I mean, I just don't. I really, the game was pretty humbling. I mean, I literally, when I got on that show, I say this all the time, I just thought I was the smartest guy, and I thought I knew everything that I needed to know, and that I was playing the game better than anybody could play the game, and so on and so forth, when, in fact, I didn't have as much of a clue as I should have, and I'm sure I was rubbing people the wrong way, and I could go on and on and on. The other thing that's kind of weird, and maybe not so much, that I think, and Probst was really hard on me my season 2. I mean, he bashed me in his blog after every single episode, that Marty thinks he's playing a great game and he doesn't know shit. But I think part of it was that when you watch as much as we watch, and then you actually get on the game, you have this perception that the game is moving or should be moving much faster than it actually does or should, because we watch it on TV. And when we watch it on TV, that's 42 minutes out of thousands of hours, right, of everything. So when I hit the beach, I was like, man, I just wanted to go full speed and just strategize and play hard and play right away, when in fact the game is a lot slower and you really need to take a deep breath and slow down, because otherwise you're getting ahead of yourself. I mean, I don't think it really hurt me, but it definitely, that was my bitching and complaining, and even in Tribal, that people just weren't playing the game. I think part of that was that there were just way too many players on our season that literally had never watched Survivor and didn't have a clue. So that's not what I expected. I expected to get out there and be on there with a bunch of people that played the game and that were ready to form alliances and do. I mean, we had there was no alliances when I started playing. So I think part of it is if you have not been on and all of a sudden you're on, you just expect things to move faster, and when they don't, you're rushing or pushing the game, and you have to be careful with that.
That's one of the things I think I can say. If you finished at number 91, if we're ranking the game that a person played in any season, you would rank higher, because we were talking about how every season needs an Abby Maria, every season needs a Keith, but if you're on Nicaragua and you're playing with nothing but Abby Marias and Keiths, do you really have a chance at finishing better than 11th place,
Not, as you saw from my season, I was fighting for my life almost for, very, very soon thereafter. Well, we had the swap too, which didn't help matter, but to be honest, whether we had a swap or not, the older Tribe players were definitely we were not going to get anywhere quickly. We were going to continue losing all those challenges and so forth. So it would not have been a good situation anyway, but it probably would have been better than where I was, which was, heading over there with Jane was the beginning of the end.
With or without the Medallion of Power, your fate was pretty much sealed.
Yes, exactly.
Julian Gronenberg, one of our Oslets who contributes a lot on this show, has a question, and I'm pretty sure this answer, based on the way he phrases it, is a given, but he says, will you buy Spencer a beer if Spencer wins, or should he buy it for you if he wins?
I would buy Spencer a beer. Nothing would make me happier, even if he had $1 million in his pocket. Nothing would make me happier than to buy Spencer a beer. That would just be great. I just love that guy, and again, Ben was giving us such a hard time because the last time we were on, it was just like this mutual admiration society. But what can I say? I just he resonates for me, and I just love the guy, and nothing would make me happier than to see him pick it up. And yeah, I'd buy him a big beer.
That's surprising. I would have thought maybe I'm just a cheaper person than you are. Canadians are much cheaper.
No, man. Canadians are the best. Plus, between Australians and Canadians, you guys are so much more hardcore fans than even the United States is. When you look at the viewership of the Canadian population as a percentage of people that watch the show, it's almost like double what it is in the United States, or close to.
Yeah.
I can't remember. During my season, when I look at it, on a per capita basis, it's huge. I mean, people just go nuts.
It's still top 5 here, I believe, on most weeks. I think in America, it's maybe a top 20 show. I mean, it's top 5 here. I think a couple of seasons it's ranked in top 2. Heroes vs. Villains, I think, was #1 show of the year. So yeah, bigger fans here in Canada.
Yeah, for sure.
You need to come to Canada more often. You said you've been to Winnipeg before. You come out here sometime during the summer. It's a little bit nicer.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I love it, and I mean, come on, let's be honest here. I've been off the show almost 5 years now, or whatever it is, and I still get recognized when I go up to Canada.
Oh, yeah.
Cracks me up. I mean, you would never, ever expect that, but there's so many people up there that follow it that are just really hardcore about it. I absolutely love it. And the same goes for Australia. I mean, they just absolutely love the show.
And Australia is finally getting their own version of Survivor Australia, and we still have yet to see a Canadian version of Survivor. So if we ever get a Canadian version of Survivor, I'm going to call on you to give me a letter of recommendation or something.
Count on it, Colin. Count on it.
Nice. full circle from me including you on my application become an Ozlitz.
Exactly.
We'll get to our final set of questions here and predictions. And just as a reminder, like we said, you did the recap with Spencer last time where, Spencer became mini Marty for an hour and a half there. And I think I'm happy to say that it looks like you came out on top here as far as predictions go, because you were on, I believe, the second last episode of the season, the one right before the finale. And Spencer predicted Jacqueline to win, and you predicted Natalie. So there you go. If Spencer can win this season, we pretty much have it as a lock that you can play a better game next time, or you have a better read on people.
I'm going to have to remind Spencer of that next time.
If you don't remind him, we'll remind him. If he wins this season and comes on, we'll remind him.
Perfect.
We also have to say that last week we had a recap for both episodes 10 and 11 with Purple Kelly from your season. And her tip... I'm sorry to laugh at this, but Purple Kelly did power rankings for us for a whole season. This is pretty much what we saw. Her tip to win last week was Keith.
Oh, Purple. Oh, God, love her.
Yeah.
God, love her.
Her next to go was Wentworth. So, she also put her player most similar to was Monica, and based on the edit, I guess that might be similar, but...
I see that on that one, she's spot on.
Yeah. Well, we know again, we already have confirmation, you're a better student in the game than Spencer. We don't even have to get your answers yet. We know you have a better tip to win than Purple Kelly here with Keith. But let's get it. Who, at this point, a few episodes to go, is your tip to win Survivor Cambodia?
Oh man, I'm going to go with Wentworth.
Mm-hmm. For all the reasons you said earlier.
Yeah, if you were to ask me right now, that's what my instinct tells me. I mean, I would love to be able to say Spence or Jeremy, but I think they're going to have a really hard time. Now, Jeremy does have an idol left, though, right? And I think next episode, is that the last episode he can play it?
I believe so, yeah, because there's only 2 episodes left. Unless they can play it at the final 5, and we have a final 5 on the finale night. But either way, he's got 1 or 2 weeks. Both of them only have 1 or 2 weeks left to play it.
Yeah. So who knows, right? I mean, with that, you just never know how it's all going to go down. It could... We've seen stranger things happen, but if you were to ask me right now, sort of on gameplay, dynamics of who's left and so forth, I would go with Wentworth, honestly.
I think if I'm analyzing the game, again, this is where it's so unpredictable. I would not necessarily agree, but then if I'm analyzing how the edit's gone and everything, I mean, it almost seems like she is being set up for a win. So I think I can kind of see what you're saying there.
Yeah, I mean, who would you go with and why then if it's not Wentworth?
I'd probably lean towards Jeremy or Tasha at this point, just because, again, I think they have more points on that resume. But again, that's all dependent on if they make it to the end. We do the power rankings every week, and when I was writing it this week, I'm like, yeah, Tasha has this in her favor, Jeremy has this in her favor, but then I kind of had to put on the end there. That's if they can make it to the end. So Wentworth's kind of, I guess, slipped under people's radars a little bit the last couple of weeks. I mean, Sierra was targeted before she was, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah, and I mean, who knows? Maybe Spencer would have less of a compelling story at the end, but I got to tell you, I think Spencer would give an incredible speech at the end. That's for sure. I mean, he's very articulate, and I think he could spell out a pretty compelling story for why he got to where he's at and why people should throw a vote his way. But does he have as big a resume as everybody else? Not necessarily, but I think that's just the guy had really, really crappy circumstances, right? I mean, you can only do big moves insofar as you have an opportunity to make them, and if you don't have that, then unfortunately you're going to stay alive, and the only big moves are, now you're starting to see them out of him.
So who would you pick then as your dark horse? Somebody with maybe not quite as good of a chance, but you can see them definitely slipping under the radar and winning.
If there would be somebody slipping under the radar and winning, it would be more like Kimmy, I think, a little bit, who not as strong of a resume. Otherwise, it's the other cast of characters. Like I said, I mean, I hate to sound totally lame and, wishy-washy and non-committal, but, there's every reason why you should say that, Jeremy can take it all the way to the end. Like, I think if he finds himself at Final 3, I think he should be able to win.
Mm-hmm. Do you want us to put you down for Jeremy or Kimmy or both?
as
The dark horse.
as runner-ups.
Yeah.
I'll go with both of those.
Yeah, we can do both. And then you have a better chance of getting it right next time, too. That's the other benefit.
Right.
Our next question is, who's the next person to go?
Yeah, because does Wentworth still has an idol, right?
Yeah, both her and Jeremy have the idols.
Yeah, so I mean, you would lean towards saying, people are going to want to take out strong people still. I don't think they're going to take out weak people, so I don't think it's necessarily, it's not going to be like an Abby or a Keith, not yet. I mean, I don't think, so you would think people are gunning for, Jeremy, Spencer, Wentworth, or, and not even Kimmy. Like, I just don't think she's, somebody that they want to take out right away. So, so I would not say Kelly or Jeremy, just because I think they'd be smart enough that if they felt they were on the chopping block, they'd cover themselves. So, could be Spencer.
Yeah, and again, that's not that unheard of because we don't know how much Jeremy's trusting at this point. We don't know if Tasha's even with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
If it happens, then again, another thing to rub into Spencer's face when you talk.
Oh, I don't. I'm got fingers crossed that it does not happen. Yeah. That's for sure.
We asked you this earlier, but again, you can give us a different answer if you want. Who from your season, would you want to see have a second chance? You kind of mentioned Holly out there earlier. Is there somebody else you'd rather see?
No, I don't think so. A lot of the people on my season are sort of like, I think, been there, done it, and won it, and did it, and I don't know that they have enough, going on. Like, even there's good players like Sash, who I thought played an incredible game, but I just, he's the kind of guy that played a game that was so... He did all the right things, which is basically he never said anything, ever, like in tribal or anywhere, so not really compelling in terms of viewership, you know what I mean? Like, he played a great game, and he made it really far, and under a lot of other circumstances would be the guy that should have gotten more votes than he did, which he got 0, based on just his gameplay. But again, it was just because he was so kind of quiet and sneaky and all the things that you should be in Survivor, but it just didn't go his way. So, like, he's a really good player, but I just don't know that he would be somebody that would make sense to bring back. So, yeah, I mean, I can't think of anybody else. I mean, does anybody stick out for you from that season that you think, I mean... Jane, probably. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, again, like, I'm a big fan. I'll just say, the first time I watched Nicaragua, probably ranked among my bottom seasons, outside of you and Brenda. I guess as soon as you and Brenda were gone, it's like, well, what's there really to watch? When I rewatched the season, there was a lot of entertainment, but like you said, it's like, entertainment from Nayanka, entertainment from Jane, people where it's like, okay, now when you really look at it, do they have anything more to offer? So... Holly really would be the one that I would think of where it's like, I'd love to see her back. I don't necessarily think we need to see more Chase, despite the fact he made an interesting season. So, yeah, I'd probably go with that. If not, maybe one of the earlier people like Jimmy T would be interesting.
Yeah, like I said, Holly's the only one that comes to mind for me, and Jimmy T would be funny. I mean, he's still really hung up and thinks that I was the person that was the reason why he got voted out of our season, which is just untrue. But he's a sweet guy and he's very funny. Just the accent, everything. Actually, he's good TV. I think he would be fun to see again. Actually.
Well, we have one final question here, and I'm really interested to see. We haven't really got that much of an impression of how you stack against the players this season, but. Based on the players we've seen on Second Chances this year, who's the player this season you feel you're most like in your game?
Geez, I would probably end up probably a little bit like Spencer, believe it or not. I mean, I kind of feel the same. My mind works the same way that his does. I was in trouble so much of my season. Sort of Spencer seems to be both, in his first season and this season. So I would probably say, I think, Spencer,
Mm-hmm. He's going to be happy to hear that answer. I think that's what we were hoping to hear from you, too. I just had this idea in my head, and can you imagine a season like Blood versus Water, where it's just players, like ally players, where you could have Marty and Spencer are a team on Blood versus Water, and you could have, Rob and Amber. Well, that would be a little bit stacked in their favor, but imagine a Blood versus Water format where you have previous players playing together. That's something that would be fun to see.
Yeah, that would be cool. I think that would be a pretty neat idea.
Other than Spencer, let's say the entire history of Survivor, this is completely going off of our Cambodia recap here. Other than Spencer, are there any other players that, let's say you had been called back for this season, you just would have loved to have played with?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, Savage, for sure. I really, really would. Geez, there's, more than a couple. I mean, I would love to have played with Dietz. And I would have really liked to have played with a guy that I actually, it's not like I spend tons of time with him or anything like that, but I definitely see him, at least once a year show, is Coach, Dragon Slayer. Yeah.
That would make an interesting alliance.
Yeah.
The Chess Master and the Dragon Slayer.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a lot of fun for me.
Just out of curiosity, did you do voting into this season, like for who you wanted back on the season?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I voted almost every day if I could remember to. Absolutely.
Are there any players that, you were really behind where they did make it on? And I guess at the same time, is there anybody you voted for where you really disappointed they didn't make it on the season?
No, and I didn't, I guess the way the voting worked, it forced you to vote for everybody, you know what I mean?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, like you couldn't just vote for like 8 people or whatever, like you had to vote a full cast. Mm-hmm. So that was whatever, right? Because it was really only like 6 people or something that I was really interested in seeing back on. So no, I voted definitely Fishback, Savage, Terry, Monica, Abby, and yeah, Fishback, Savage, Terry. I voted for those guys. I think those were the ones I was really consistently voting for.
So you pretty much got your dream season then.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I got to see, like, everybody that I really wanted to see on got on, so yeah, there was nobody that I really wanted to get on that didn't, so.
Well, we're what now, 2 weeks away from the finish, and I'm guessing you're just as excited as I am to see how probably having just as much of a hard time predicting how this is going to turn out. Are you making plans for the finale night or anything like that, or just a stay-at-home thing?
It's a stay-at-home thing, and we, I typically record it, and then I watch it, a little bit after it starts, and no, it's a family thing. My wife and the kids, and here at the house, and it's going to be awesome. I can't wait.
Oh, we can't wait to have you back on a recap at some point in the future, too. We can update you on your picks from this season and maybe get you on with Spencer or somebody else again for another recap. But it's been great talking to you today, Marty, and getting a lot of insight into the game from somebody who spends a lot of time watching it and analyzing, I guess.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for stepping in for Ben and taking the time out on a Sunday to record this thing with me. It's always fun to talk to people that love the game and to exchange thoughts, views, and just to talk strategy and stuff. So it's a real pleasure for me. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, next time you're in Winnipeg on business, if it's winter, come in and you have a warm place to hang out for an afternoon or watch Survivor here for a night. And if not, drop me a line.
You got it. You can count on it.
Thanks again to Marty Piombo from Survivor in Nicaragua for doing this recap. We're only a few weeks away from the end of the season now, and really good to get a very in-depth analysis from Marty. One of the most interesting analysis of the game I've heard on this show so far. So big thanks to him, and I was more than happy to step in and do the recap this week. When I knew it was Marty, I would have done it regardless, but having Marty on there just makes it all the more easy to spend an hour and so much talking about Survivor this week. We will be continuing more coverage this week. There's the Oz Topsy lined up as always with Ben this week. And if you haven't noticed, definitely go to our Facebook page because there is an interview happening this week, long-awaited interview with San Juan del Sur contestant Reed Kelly coming up. One of the most entertaining characters on San Juan del Sur for the little time we did see him, but be interesting to hear that interview and also to see if he has any opinions on the current season with Jeremy and Keith and Wentworth still out there. 3 of his contestants still making up almost half the cast of the show left now. And then, of course, another recap next week with another past contestant. And from what I understand, we do have Survivor Philippines winner Denise safely lined up. That, of course, can change as always. Sometimes the scheduling doesn't work out. But as of right now, it is Denise. So if you want to start thinking about your questions and get ready to get them to Ben. And, of course, always like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and send in all your comments. Give us a rating on iTunes. Give us a review on iTunes. We're only 2 episodes away from the end of the season. There'll be lots of coverage to come. I'm excited to see how this is going to turn out. So until next time, we will speak to you on the train.